Welcome everyone to this very special event, Windows, Mirrors, and Doors, the importance of First Nations representation in children's literature. My name is Rose McKenney. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all lands that we're on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, Hawaiian, and First Nations people that call this land home. We acknowledge the lands stolen from the Indigenous peoples who first called these lands home and the massive wealth unjustly created on these stolen lands. We also acknowledge our sisters and brothers brought here in chains and enslaved to create what we now call the United States of America. We hear the pain, we see the trauma, and we are committed to the hard work ahead, supporting the change needed to create a society that fights for justice. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I've included a link in the chat for you to use and aid in determining the ancestral lands you're currently on. I'm honored to say that I am a granddaughter and visitor from the land of the Haida people and acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish Puyallup people. Please take a moment to share in the chat the land you're currently on. I've done a lot of reflecting on how to articulate oral storytelling from an Indigenous perspective. First, I'll say that some of what I understand about storytelling is from growing up and hearing stories. I wish I would have paid more attention to the stories shared by the elders in my life. Some were entertaining, some were educational, some were historical, and some were lessons. Many were a combination of each one. Indigenous people often use humor to cope, but I will be bold and say that every culture uses stories to cope. I would like to take a moment to emphasize that as Indigenous people, we are here because of our stories, because of our history and the stories of our ancestors. Storytelling is for entertainment, yes, but it's also traditional, healing, teaching of lessons, history, family, values, customs, rituals, beliefs, the ability to become a good listener, and connection with each other, with land, and with nature. And yes, entertainment. As grown-ups and professionals, we tend to think we are the expert on most things. We create schools, curriculum, books, assessments, etc. I don't mean to minimize these things. What I want to present is the perspective that we must lead with connection. Oral storytelling is a great and natural way to connect with each other and specifically why we're here today, children. Books are fantastic. I think we can all agree that reading to children has evidenced increased early literacy skills in families where books are abundant and children are read to. Books are great tools for caregivers to use to engage children for teaching, entertainment, and bonding. What I'm proposing is to open our hearts to the understanding that each of us have the ability to share stories with children. We come from a history of great people with humor and strength and hope. We're here today because of their stories. Our children are here today because of their stories and also because of our own stories. This is how we empower the next generation, by sharing the stories that carried us here, maybe especially the entertaining ones. But it can also be sharing our favorite book as a child because books, they carry us too. Which leads me to my reflection on the topic we're on regarding this web series, Representation in Children's Books. Storytelling that children can identify with in their own culture is profound. In Indigenous communities, this can look very different. It's quite common for us to not only use people, but also animals and nature in our stories for children. We value connection to the land and environment around us. We understand that that connection will help us learn more about ourselves and life than most anything else will. Therefore, representation in books for our communities might look different than others, but I would like to note that many lessons gained from these stories are universal and not exclusive to Indigenous culture. Everyone can learn from them. Finally, we need to remember the innate ability children have as storytellers. It's powerful to follow the lead of our children when they're excited about a story, whether it's a book or one that they've worked up in their imagination. Cultivating storytelling in children helps to develop their confidence, sense of self, their connection with us and each other. It's incredibly healing and a great way to cope during stress. These are things we can all use in these unprecedented times. Storytelling crosses all cultures and generations. Revitalizing storytelling and promoting books by Indigenous authors is reclaiming a part of our heritage that colonialism attempted to steal from us, and the world is better for it. I am so happy to be here with all of you today for this rich conversation. And now I would like to welcome our moderator, Jennifer David. Jennifer David is the co-host for the podcast Storytellers, which supports and promotes First Nations, Inuit, and Métis authors and their books. She's worked on the field of Indigenous communications and consulting for 25 years. She was the Director of Communications for the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network and now works as a senior consultant for Envision Insight Group in Ottawa. A proud member of the Chaplain Cree Nation, Jennifer was born and raised in Omushkego Treaty 9 territory. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Where I'm from, we say Wache, we say Ani. I am indeed Jennifer David. I say Entis-Nakasin. That means my name is Jennifer David, and I am of mixed ancestry, including Cree or Omushkego from northeastern Ontario. And I'm happy to be your host this evening. I would also like to do my own acknowledgement. I do acknowledge the land and territory where I come from, which is Omushkego or Treaty 9 territory. And I now live here in Ottawa, Ontario, which is on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. So I would like to tell you that I'm definitely an enthusiastic supporter and reader of books by Indigenous authors. And as Rose said, I am the host of a podcast, which is actually called Story Keepers. Let's Talk Indigenous Books with my co-host, who is an Indigenous writer by the name of Wapgishi Grice. So you can check that out if you're interested, storykeeperspodcast.ca. And so now I'd like to introduce you to the reason why we're all here. We want to hear from our presenters and speakers. First, I'm going to introduce Kevin Millard. Kevin is the debut author of Fry Bread, a Native American family story, which is a picture book that won the Sibert Medal and the American Indian Youth Literature Honor. He's also a professor of law at Syracuse University, a contributor to the New York Times, and a co-founder of Black Stream Partners. He has written for The Atlantic and has provided on-air commentary to ABC News and MSNBC. Kevin is an enrolled member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and he's based in Manhattan. Welcome, Kevin. And I'd like to introduce as well Carol. Carol Lindstrom is the author of the New York Times best-selling and Caldecott award-winning book, We Are Water Protectors. She is Anishinaabe Métis and is a proud member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe. She was born and raised in Nebraska and currently lives her home in Maryland. So welcome to Carol and Kevin. Very nice to see you.
Thank you.
I have some questions that I would like to ask that I think our audience and guests would like to learn more about you and your work. So I just want to say to people who are joining us, this is a 1-hour event. We should be done around 8 p.m. Eastern. That's where I am. And I will be asking our panelists some questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions. So if you have a question, you're welcome to use the chat, and we will take some questions as well directly from the audience if you'd like. After we're finished with the questions, then I'll turn it back to Rose, where we are going to actually hear some stories, because as she mentioned, storytelling is important to all of us and all of our nations. So this talk and this speaker event is supporting children's books featuring Indigenous stories, people, and culture. So my first question is, all of our Indigenous cultures come from an oral storytelling tradition. Tell us how did and how does that inspire you as you write your books for children?
I'll let Carol go first.
Oh, Kevin, I knew you were going to do that. Let me see. Yeah, I think for me, my mom always told stories about her childhood when I was growing up, and my mother was Métis, Ojibwe. So, you know, it would be about her childhood or my ancestors and things that they had done. But I didn't really understand it then, because I think it was so disconnected from what I had ever seen in actual books, like textbooks in school, history. I was like, but mom's telling me this, but then I don't really see that the rest of the world is saying this, And so I thought, well, if the rest of the world isn't saying this, then it can't be really true. Or it's my mom's remembrance of it. You know what I mean? But I just kind of felt like there was a really big disconnect there, and I didn't really get it forever when I was young. But so I think that was a big part of the storytelling for me. Now I feel like, obliged, obligated, to tell those stories, but to tell accurate stories and truthful stories, although still fictional too, not necessarily all, this is what happened and blah, 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 but stories that I wanted to read when I was young, and stories that, all children need to read, so that they can see that we are still here, that we have always been here, that they don't grow up feeling like I did, or, not seeing us and us not being seen. So yes, I think that storytelling was, as a Native person, as you mentioned, a very big part of my childhood. And now I feel like I said, I'm grateful I can do that now.
Okay, thanks.
So Kevin, go.
You, Kevin.
Well, one thing that's interesting in my family, I grew up in Oklahoma, and my mother is from Seminole Nation. And when my parents had me, they were both in their 40s. So in the 1970s, they would have been, geriatric parents. I mean, I'm in my 40s now with children, and, in Manhattan, and there are a lot of 40-year-old parents. But so it was like a generation had skipped before they had me. So I always considered my parents like my grandparents, but they were actually my parents. And so the stories that they would have about all of the people that came before were almost legendary, because by the time I got to be in grade school, most of those people were already gone. So I grew up so enmeshed in storytelling anyway, because they're talking about their parents. And I actually didn't get to meet my biological grandparents. I met their younger siblings, which I called my grandparents, but they weren't actually my grandparents. But then it was like there was this set of stories that they would tell, like a storm is coming in the sky, right? And then someone plants a spade in the ground, and then the clouds part, right? Like some kind of Moses story, right? And then it made the storm go the other way. And then so the way that people tell this, and then they retell it, right? Every time it's like that game Telephone in grade school, where one person tells it, then another person tells it, it twists a little bit.
Yeah.
By the time you get to it, it was like, and then grandfather took a bulldozer and put it in the sky and stopped a hurricane, which was in Oklahoma. Like, there's no hurricane, right? But then it was always so funny. So you could see this progression, and it was like this I think I know William Faulkner had said there are 13 ways of looking at a blackbird, right? So there were just like these blackbirds everywhere all over Oklahoma because everybody had their different way of remembering this mythical grandparent or Mama Rachel. She would do this, right? And then I never met these people. So I just grew up with more actual stories than I actually had relatives. So when it comes to storytelling for me, it's a way of almost creating a bigger family than what I actually have, because I have 2 siblings. I have, some people might be shocked by this, but I have 2 first cousins. That's it. I only have 2 first cousins, right? Other people have like 30 cousins and all these people. So I don't come from a huge family. So when I'm writing these stories, I write a lot of people that are in them that are no longer with us, and then they can live their lives through these stories. And there was a manuscript that I was working on where I was describing that, how people live on through narrative, even though they are not physically with us anymore.
I love it. I love it. That's great. They are our relatives. That's great. I'd like to talk about these phenomenal books that you've written. So I just want to ask each of you a question about your books. And I'll start with you, Carol. I said, so thinking about your award-winning book, We Are the Water Protectors, you took up a contemporary issue that might not seem like a suitable theme for a book for preschool age children, but you made it very relatable. There's some activism in here too with that pledge at the end of the book. So tell us a little bit more about why it was important to you to make a book on this particular topic and how you made it inspiring for young children.
Yes, that is a good question. Boy. Well, first I want to say that the book We Are Water Protectors actually started out as a young adult novel. It was going to be there was a lot more stuff in there I wanted to talk about. That was a lot, a lot heavier and deeper stuff that I could in a picture book. So that I hadn't even thought about a picture book initially. I thought, well, it's going to be a novel. But of course I knew, and when I started it, it was probably about the time that the camp was set up in Standing Rock. So about 2016. So that probably summer I started writing it, and it was going to, and I knew this was going to take me a while because it was a novel and I was going to need to do a lot of research for it. And because of what the content was going to be, the fiction, but a lot of factual things too, it would take a long time. And so I thought, well, this isn't something, I don't want to wait that long to get this information out, because when all this stuff had started beginning with Standing Rock, which was the camp set up in April of 2016, I probably wasn't aware of it till like May or June of 2016. So a couple months later, but it wasn't anywhere on mainstream media. It was nowhere, on anything. It was like Facebook, people that I followed that were native would be posting it, or some of the Unicorn Riot, different little places that I didn't normally see things. I'm like, what is going on? Why isn't the world aware of this? What is this? What is happening here? And so I was really like, oh, God, I need to do something. What can I do? Just feeling very, very helpless because, Standing Rock is in North Dakota and my tribe is in my tribal homelands are in Turtle Mountain, which are in Belcourt, North Dakota. So right on the, let's say the border, which really doesn't mean anything to us, but they're around the 49th parallel was my tribe. And then, so Fort Yates area was Standing Rock. So I kind of felt, wow, I feel connected to this, My mother always spoke about, she grew up in Williston, North Dakota. So she always spoke about the oil fields, and I knew about the Bakken oil fields. And so I thought, oh, geez, I can't believe that the world isn't aware of this. And they're acting like this is not a big deal, but it's not just an Indian issue. This is an everybody issue. This is a world issue. This is plants and trees and us, And so, and that's when I thought, well, I need to do something quicker. Well, what can I do? Well, maybe I'll write a picture book, well, that'll be quicker. At least, it's 500 words versus 50,000 words. And I thought, well, I could get my hands quicker around it, and at least maybe. But, then how do you do it? How do you begin this story? So I thought, well, I'll just have this I wanted the story to be it was certainly a narrative story. It was more about this young girl who, and as she went about her day, she encountered like construction equipment. She saw it coming on her tribal burial lands, which, it was doing in Standing Rock. And then I became friends on Facebook with the woman who started the camp. And I became friends with many people through Standing Rock that are still my dear friends today. Well, some are going to law school for it. And I'm just so happy that, anyway, so big things, but I just felt like, what can I do? I wanted to go, but I couldn't go. So the book would be my way to do something. So I wrote this book. I wrote it in a more narrative arc. And really, that's how I got my agent, which I had no clue. Serendipity, I'm telling you. So I had no idea. I sent off the manuscript, and maybe 5 minutes later, I get a response. And she's like, what is this? Send me, I want to see this,
Wow.
And we talked about it. And she said, well, you must have saw my manuscript wish list on Twitter. They have that sometimes, Kevin, and I'm like, no. She said, it was like 6 months ago. And I go, no, I didn't come to you out of the blue. And I said, I saw you on Facebook. And I said, I thought, I think she would be a good match for the story because of her background and what she likes. And so I said, that's what happened. So yeah, it started out this way. And Kathleen said, I think my agent said, like, well, maybe you could write it more lyrical. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know what that means. Because, but to me, it was, I mean, I know the subject matter is, heavy. And I remember when my son was in, I think, 7th grade or 6th grade when I wrote the book, and we were at he had like a drama thing, and there was a bunch of parents there, and one of the parents asked me what I did, and I said, well, I write picture books. It was just when I had sold water protectors and it was coming out, and I said, well, I have a book about water protectors. It's about this Standing Rock and, indigenous people's fight for water. And she said, oh, I don't know how you're going to do that.
Really?
Well, I think I could do that. I mean, but it's easy-ish. And I don't mean easy. I don't want to say easy, but I just mean because children get it,
Yeah.
They do. They really do. It's not like you have to talk down to them for them to understand that we, they know what protect means.
Yeah.
So many teachers and parents and whatnot, the past year when the book came out, right when the pandemic started, 2020, March 2020, right when everything closed down. And so, a lot of parents and so forth have said, protectors is a word that a lot of children can get behind because it makes them feel like I know that I have a job to do. There's something bigger than me. It's almost like a superhero feeling. And I thought, I think that they understood that. And the teachers were saying they apply that to a lot with the masks and so forth, that, we need to protect each other. And, it's not about us. So yes, it's such an easy thing in a way because it really is simple. Wow. And the book is really simple.
Yeah,
we need to protect our water, right?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I babble for hours.
No, that's fine. It's very interesting, right? So now I'm going to ask you a question, Kevin, about your book. So in your book, Fry Bread, you specifically name several nations right in the book. And they're words that some parents might have to work hard to learn to pronounce and say. So tell us about why it was important for you to say, Fry Bread is nation, and include all of those in your book.
One of the most rewarding parts of writing the book was contacting these tribes to make sure that, one, I was spelling the name of the tribe correctly, because you can't trust the internet all the time. And also, I wanted to represent the tribe's names as people call themselves, because some tribes have really, really long names. And a lot of those are people like in the north central part of the continent, right? It'll be like the eastern band of the this and this of this and this states. And I was like, I don't think people walk around calling themselves this. They're like, I'm, a one-word thing. So I wanted each one of these people, when they would pick up the book, they're reading it to their kids, they're able to say, look, we're finally in a book. Because when I became a parent, I was just looking for books, and this was in 2002, and it was, this was 10 years ago, but, in the world of children's literature, 10 years is like 55, it's like dog years, right? And so 10 years ago, it was really difficult to find a lot of native picture books, especially for younger children. There were some like longer ones, like Cynthia Leidig Smith had some stuff out. Joe Bruchac had some things, but there weren't a lot that you could go into a bookstore right by you and find something and go and take it home. It was way, way more difficult than that. And so I wanted something where everyone could look at this and feel a part of it and feel some type of ownership where they could claim it. And so it was Juana Martinez Neal's idea to put every single tribe name in the end papers of the book. So in my manuscript, I have a page where I list about 12 tribe names. And I was picking tribe names, that were very literary. And Carol had said the word lyrical, ones that beautifully roll off the tongue. And then Juana was like, why don't we include all the tribes? So when she first said that, she was like, thinking like, oh, this will be an easy thing. We'll just like list all the tribes. And then I started to be like, oh my God. Because, with Native people, it's like, who counts, who does not count, what tribes are real, what tribes are not real. So some people will have a very clear idea. Other people have a murkier idea. Some tribes are federally recognized. Some tribes are state recognized. Some people are fighting for recognition. There are Canadian nations, right? So it was like, how do we include all these different names that are here? And so that was just a thing itself. Like sometimes I'll see a comment where someone will be like, my tribe is not listed on there. And then I'll go through and then I'll be like, oh no, it can't be, because we really tried to keep every United States of America, 50 states, tribes in there. And they are all on there, but sometimes people don't read it correctly, like all the way across, like they look in the fold. But I just wanted everyone to be able, like whenever you go to a memorial or you might donate to something and you look for your name on the donor list and you're like, I want to make sure my name is on there because you feel seen. And then all of these kids and all these people that never had a book before about them have not been seen in literature. So then in that book, when they can point out their tribe name on the paper, they feel seen.
So I think that's amazing. And you were talking about books. So, you didn't have access to books by Indigenous authors when you were a child, but what were some of the books that sort of inspired you, or maybe some characters from books that resonated with you as a child? Can you think of any?
I have some funny ones. I mean, I don't know what it says about me that my favorite book from there were two. One was The Little House, which I'm wondering if that influenced Carol. It's the Virginia Lee Burton one where it's like the house in the country and then the city starts to envelop it. And then the house like wants to stay on its own land and it refuses to move. The city grows up around it and the house goes derelict and then someone comes along and moves it somewhere else so we can have a better environment. I love that book, like for a number of reasons. Now it's kind of like there's some things going on there, like why don't they preserve the house? Why does the house have to move? But I still love the drawings. And then there was another book called I'm Terrific, which no one else has ever heard of. But it's about this little bear who just thinks he's amazing. So amazing that no one wants to be his friend, and then he has to start being nice to people if he wants to keep his friends.
Interesting. What does that say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting. Very interesting. What about you, Carol? Do you recall books or characters when you were a kid that inspired
You know, I was thinking about this because I'm a bit older than Kevin. So, when I grew up, I just remember, I remember the Little House on the Prairie books. I had such a hard time with them. A love-hate thing, but now I can really see and understand more about what happened. But as a child, I just didn't understand. I loved the relationship of the characters and the family-ish, and because I wasn't my home life wasn't like that great sometimes, and so I got to escape in that way, and I like that. But at the same time, when I read about when Native peoples were discussed, and I was, a savage, and I was a wild Indian, I didn't understand that because I thought, nobody I know looks like that.
Yeah.
Nobody I know dresses like that today. Nobody I know acts like that. I don't know what that meant.
Yeah.
So for me, I struggled a lot with that because I couldn't ever find a book where I could see me, where are the people that have brown hair and brown eyes and brown skin?
That's why you guys have written and
That's
others
right.
books, right?
And Cynthia Leidig Smith, as Kevin said, is one of the first authors that I ever saw, even, and that shows you how old really I had to be to have her books, because Jingle Dancer was a book where I went, oh my gosh. There's actually a book that someone bought, a publisher put out about us.
Right.
And, because I remember prior to We Need Diverse Books coming around in 2013, I was writing then, big way back, and our books were just not wanted. Excuse me. I remember going to conferences and being told flat out by agents and publishers, no one will ever buy these books. They are not books for the trade. The trade will not buy them. They're just too niche. And so I thought, but this is what I want to write. But this is what I want to tell. So I just figured, well, I'll just write books about rabbits and bunnies and all these other things. And maybe, I'll get published that way and then I can write my books. But luckily, the times are changing.
Yes,
and they have changed. Yes. And we're able to see now all the amazing books that are out.
That's right.
It's so wonderful.
Wonderful. I have one more question before I like to open it up for the audience, and that is, what would you say to authors who want to include Indigenous characters in their children's books, but they're not Indigenous themselves? There's a big debate going on, not just in children's literature, but overall, right, about appropriation or, that kind of thing, and there's creative license. So what are your thoughts on that? What would you tell sort of authors if they want to, have that diversity, but they're not Indigenous?
I would tell them, go get you some friends. Send it off to people. I mean, even if I'm going to write a story about like some Asian characters, I'm going to write stories about Black characters, I'm going to get my friends to read this anyway, right? Because I want to know what they have to think about it. Yeah. But I also want to get other people's perspective, like, oh, did I represent this right? Did I include something in the illustration that I shouldn't have? And I think that we as Native writers can lean on each other for those types of very critical reads. And so if we're doing it, definitely people that are not Native or they're not Black or not Asian or not whatever, they should be feeling free to do that exact same thing.
Right. Anything else,
Oh,
Carol?
me? I will say I'm going to have to disagree
Interesting.
with Kevin, and I'm just going to say no. No, I don't think that people that are not native should be writing outside of their culture, because I think that it's been too damaging for too long. I think that there are far too many Native peoples that have been not denied the opportunity to tell their stories. And I think that my first question, and I've been asked many times by non-Native peoples about can they write the story, and I ask them always why. Why do you want to write this story? What is your reasoning? What does it mean to you? What is it? Why? And why do you feel you can tell this story better than someone that is of that culture, of that tribe, of any Native culture? Because we are Native peoples. As a Native people, we have just an innate, relationship with the land, with the plant, with each other, with the plants, with trees, with everything that crawls, and so our way of looking at the world is a different way, I feel. And I just think unless we, like Kevin said, have to do a lot of hard work to do this work too, even if I'm going to write about my own culture, which I am all the time, I make darn sure that I talk to the right people that know way more than I do, because I didn't grow up in my culture, as many of us didn't, because of relocation, because of all of the many traumas that came to us. So so I just feel like leave them, in my mind, stories for Native peoples to tell, because those are so needed by the people that can tell them. So thank you for asking.
Well, thank you for both those perspectives. I appreciate that. So believe it or not, it's almost 7:45 almost already. So we might have time for a question. I believe the question might pop up on the screen. There we go. Look at that, the magic of technology. Can you reflect on the importance of other children from other cultures reading your books?
Yes. Well, I think that's also critical. I think it's critical for children of all cultures to read all cultures. I think it's so, when my son was little, that's all I filled his bookshelves with, was books from all cultures, because we are, this world is all cultures, all diversities, all everything. And so I think starting at a young age to have a diverse, all children need to see us, that we're still here, but also to, see the world around them, perhaps where they're growing up isn't, maybe they don't have a lot of interaction with people from the Native communities or an Asian community, but sometimes the books are a wonderful bridge for that, seeing the illustrations and accurately done, and, positively done, that reinforces the cultures. I think the books are brilliant for everybody.
Wonderful. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that many times books are the only way that people can come into contact with cultures, lands, people that they would normally not be able to. Like, a lot of kids aren't ever going to be able to see Paris. A lot of kids aren't going to be able to go to Los Angeles. And so the only way that they could see this kind of stuff is through TV and through books. Right. So it's a way of exploring the world that is accessible for many people. They can do this through school. And this is why it's so important that we have a wide variety of books that are available, because, it's been kind of a thing lately in some schools to ban certain types of books, which are usually about people of color or LGBTQ populations, right? And maybe you could get this in your local library, you can get it at a bookstore, but some people aren't able to afford that. They might not even have a great library where they are. So schools and these books are many times the first and initial encounters that children have with difference. So I like to think of children's literature as one of the very first steps that children have toward engaging with social justice. And books like Carol's book and, these other books are teaching them, here are these people that you might not ever meet. Yeah. Here are these issues that you might not ever encounter in your own house, but here's what other people are doing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this, like you can Google in a tribe name. Like you can just put in, do this like after you get off this Zoom. Think of any tribe, put it in Google, and the populated questions where it'll say like, the questions that it fills in, everything that it has about Native people is always in the past.
Yeah.
It is weird and bizarre, as if like people died a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's like a good portion of the country believes that Native people died out. So then if we have these books that are written about people that are alive, kids wearing tennis shoes, look at all these Native people with tattoos on their arms and playing soccer and lacrosse and having issues with their siblings and stuff,
Right.
like doing modern things. This is great.
Yes.
So this is how we engage each other and learn through these pages of books.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. And that is, what aspects of Native culture or the Native experience do you think have not been shared through picture books? What's missing?
Oh gosh, everything. Well, I would say accurate history of, Native peoples. I think every single tribal nation has a relocation story, a removal story, a story of how they were dispossessed of their land. We don't know those. Most of the world doesn't know that, I didn't even know, as I do research right now for my story that I'm writing, which is a middle grade historical fiction, but it's also, I'm reading about my Métis ancestry. And I mean, there's things we're finding out even now that I'm like, oh my gosh, my mother would have just been blown away to know this stuff. And it kind of, in a way, reaffirms who I am. I'm like, oh, that explains who I am who I am.
Wow.
Especially when I read, because there's a lot of historical people from Canada, and from when Canada was formed, that my people fought the Canadian government. The provincial government was my people, the Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont. Those were all my ancestors that were also part of the resistance of 1885. Most people don't even know what that was. And, that's all part of Turtle Island, which is where this big continent we live on, So I just think there's so much. I don't want to say history that's, because there's a ton of history that we need to know, but we also need to know how people live today, how, like Kevin was saying, we wear tennis shoes, we have tattoos, we live in the world, we, we create, we make all kinds of things. We're huge contributors to this planet, and we always have been. So it's just hard to say. The great thing that I can say is there are so many creators now that are Native, and they just keep coming, and they just keep coming, and finally the doors are open for them and us. And I just want to see more, because, there are 574 federally recognized tribes, but there's more that are not. All these tribal people have stories, and those people in there have stories, and we we need to see these stories, and people need to, we need to see us in sci-fi and in genre fiction and fantasy and all these other places that, like, we could be and we should be, not just in historical fiction. And, so there's so much, and that's a great question. I appreciate it. There's a lot missing, but there's a lot coming.
Yes.
And we're
what would
working
you
on
add? What would you add, Kevin?
I would add like a lot of they're definitely like the historical they're all the heavy issues. I also, my next book is kind of lighthearted, and I want to see more like humor. Like Native people are hilarious.
Yes.
Like everyone has like a crazy aunt that will tell like the most insane stories, like Carol's like, I'm that one, right? I want to see more of these like, funny stories, that are universal, that everybody can understand, that Native people can understand even more. Like, And so the next book I'm doing is kind of having these like inside jokes that people will be able to recognize. For other people, they'll be like, "Oh, isn't that like fun and cute?" But other people will be like, "Ah, government cheese, or whatever, commodities or something like that." So I want to see a lot more smiles and giggles.
I agree with you about humor because, I hate to butt in, but humor is so important. As you said, my mother was the funniest human being ever. And there's so much, and there's a lot of sarcasm,
Yes,
a lot of,
very true.
a lot of teasing, And my mother, and it used to drive me crazy.
Yeah.
But it was at the same time, that's who we are. That's what, So I agree. The humor is really great.
That is wonderful. And I have lots of other questions. If we had lots more time, we could have a much longer conversation, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn it back over now to Rose. And while I do that, I just want to say, Carol, if you are interested, I don't know if you've read the book by Drew Hayden Taylor. It's called Take Us to Your Chief. And it's a collection of short stories that are science fiction, but with an indigenous twist to it. So
thank you. I appreciate that very much. Miigwech.
Okay, so I'll pass it back over to Rose, and we have a few more special elements before we wrap up this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'd like to introduce our storyteller now. His name is Gene Tagaban. His traditional name is Guy Yao. He's Cherokee, Tlingit, and Filipino. For over 30 years, Gene has worked nationally and internationally in mentoring, training, speaking, sharing stories, culture, and facilitating healing. Gene is a board member and trainer with the Native Wellness Institute, keeping our ancestral wisdoms alive. He's a trainer for Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, facilitating Compass, Choose Respect, a male engagement and mentorship program to end domestic violence, sexual assault, hurt, and harm. A cultural facilitation coordinator with Mother Nation, an organization providing cultural services, advocacy, mentorship, and homeless prevention to Native women and families. Gene has also been featured at storytelling festivals nationally and internationally and is a specialty instructor and honorary uncle with the Wilderness Awareness School. Gene performs with Kuik, a native funk band based in Seattle. Gene is always open to share stories, spirit, and inspiration with people of all ages. In the words of one participant, Gene has the ability to make the audience feel safe while holding our hearts in his hands. Welcome, Gene. Thank you for coming.
Oh, Gonatish, it's good to be here. That's a heck of an introduction there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a treat. I've been honored to, have you in our community here in Washington State for a long time, and we're both Alaskan natives, and that's, very special. But anyways, I was thinking, how do you think we can nurture and encourage children as storytellers?
One way is to teach your kids who they are. Teach them about their history, who they are. For instance, that was a great introduction, Rose. I'm going to introduce myself in my traditional way. It's a Gaya Yahak to a sock, duck day, Tana, Kalkita, Kalktu Kandu I Hotiti, which Katanya Hata Ishik to Hini to a sock, Shinkit away with Yashagi, Filipino, I had Gonastish, Yakusan, Yakewe, Hayade, Gonastish, ho ho, ho ho, ho ho. And so what I just said was hi. And that's it's our native way. And when we introduce ourselves, we share a bit of our spirit, our story, our history, and that's who we are. My name, Gene Tagaban. My Tlingit name is Guy Yao. I am of the Duck Dane Ton clan, Raven Freshwater Sockeye clan from Hoonah, Alaska. Child of a Wishkatan and Yoshar clan from Maquan in Juneau, Alaska. I'm Cherokee, Tlingit, and Filipino. And I tell people I'm a Cherokee Tlingitino. That means I like to eat my salmon with rice and cornbread. But I'm also on my Filipino side. My last name is Tagaban, and my grandfather comes from Bantock, and my great grandfather comes from El Locos Norte. And my last name, Tagaban, in the Philippines is pronounced Tagaban, and it means the wielder of the sword or the machete. And so my Filipino heritage, they provided food for the people. And on my Cherokee side, I'm half Cherokee. My mom is full-blood Cherokee. Her Sloggy or Cherokee name is Weeg. I am of the Wolf Clan. And before the Trail of Tears, she traced our lineage back to a place that is now known as Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. And so with all that, just in that introduction of knowing who you are, you see, our lives are a story. We are storytellers. We are storytellers. And I'd like to share with people too that we have been dreamt into existence. Our ancestors, long, long time ago, those great, dreamt us into existence, and here we are.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
may not know who they are, but they know who we are. But who were they? Who
Right.
were they? What a it's like Carol and Kevin were talking about the histories and what else could be told with our what more could be told is those histories of who we are, because although we come from Alaska, Southeast Alaska, you're Haida, I think it.
Hmm.
Similar environments, geographies and where we're from, but still our histories of who we are as a people are different.
Right.
So how can we teach those kids to like tell their stories? Teach them about who they are. Who
Yeah.
they are, who dreamt them into existence, and not only those indigenous native kids, because we all come from someplace. Even those
That's
French,
right.
Irish, German, African American, those kids too. It's like teach them about where they come from, who they are.
Yeah.
Heritage is a beautiful thing. It's
Yes.
beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So why don't you tell us a story now, Jean?
I tell you, sure. I'll tell you a quick story here, and and I just want to share a little bit about our trickster stories, because our
Okay.
tricksters, oftentimes we talk about, sure, they're for entertainment, like it just as you said, but oftentimes too are those trickster stories are there to teach you how to teach, teaching those without them knowing that they're being taught. And those are, and read those trickster stories from all over the world. And those stories are teaching you how to teach. And one of the tricksters we have is Nichwe Anakutwe Yay, Yo Way Kandunik. Raven was walking along the beach, and he comes back from a journey. He's been gone a long time and is tired. He's tired. He flies up to his lodge on top of the mountain, and they're thinking about all his adventures, how he brought the water to the people, how he freed the stars, the moon, and sun for all the people, and they saw the world beautiful for the first time, how Raven brought the fire or the spirit to all the people. Heck, there was a time when Raven lost his nose, and he had to negotiate with the people to get his nose back, and he found himself inside a whale one time. But he was tired now, and is back home in his lodge on top of the mountain, and he wants to get some rest. And so he's just about to lie himself down, and then suddenly up through the valley, all he hears is sounds: chatter, 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 noise, 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 chatter, 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 talk, 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 voices coming from nowhere. He couldn't know, is this just in my mind? Am I thinking this? No, this is coming from down in the valley. So Raven, he jumps off his deck, flies down to the valley, all the way to the shores, and he comes to a village. And it is there in this village, he sees all the people, yes, throwing words around: chatter, 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 talk, 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 chatter, chatter, chatter. Oh, Raven was getting a headache. Oh my goodness. There are words all over the ground, words floating in the water, in the breeze, words were up in the trees, words were scattered everywhere, no regard for words. Oh, finally the people got late, and so they went to bed. They went to sleep. And while they were sleeping, Raven, he grabs a bag and he starts to gather up all these words from on the ground, on the earth, picked them up out of the water, the ones that were floating by in the air, put them in the bag. He picked them out of the trees. He gathered all these words, and he flew back to his lodge to the top of the mountain and fell asleep. In the morning time, the people come out, and the first thing they do is they open their mouth and no words. Somebody else comes out. They open their mouth and no words. They're looking at each other. No words. At first, they don't know what to do. They just sit around and look at each other. And then they start to cook their foods, make teas. And they sat there and they started to notice and feel the sun on their skin. They started to be able to listen to the sounds in the breeze. They went over to the waters, the ocean, and they sat there and they listened as the ocean told stories to them from distant shores. They went over to the trees, and the trees hold the remembering. So the trees told them stories about the old ways, and they learned the language of the animals, all the animals. This went on for a little while, and the people started to work together and to gather. And they knew how to communicate with each other without using words. They started to feel. They started to feel. They started to feel. It was one morning that it was an old timer came out. And you know how old timers, sometimes their bones creak a little bit and they make a little bit of noise when they just open their mouths in the morning. So this old timer came out. He goes, oh, and a sound came out. It wasn't a word. It was a sound. Another sound. And so he ran in and he started to grab his drum and he started putting these sounds together. Oh, ho, hey, he, ho, oh, he, ha. Just these sounds. And these sounds came out and all the people came out and what is this? What is this? And all the people started to sing together. The waters were singing with them. The animals were singing to them. Everything was singing. And it traveled up the valley to Raven and he heard these sounds and he flew back down to the shore. What is this? And he saw the people working together, singing together, taking time to understand and listen and to feel. Oh, this is good, said Raven. So Raven, he thought, maybe it's time for them to have their words. So Raven reaches into his bag and he pulls out a word. He pulls out a word and he passes it around. And the people take a look at this word. They pass it back and forth and they hold it in awe and they hold it in reverence. And then Raven reaches in and grabs another word and passes that around. And the people hold those words in reverence in a good way. And they use them and they use these words respectfully. You see, words are like fog. Watch how you use them because you never know. They can hang there and you never know who's going to walk through those words. And that's when the people started all over again. You see, the story is important. And I was told by a teacher this one time that one day there's going to be a computer the all-knowing computer. It's going to know everything. And will be able to answer you just like that. And somebody's going to go up to that computer and ask that computer, what is the meaning of life? And the computer will pause for a moment. And the computer will go, let me tell you a story. So awesome. Thank you so much for this time and this opportunity just to share the importance of story, not only the oral story, but the written story, the value of it, the value of reading and connection with each other. And that's what stories are. That's how we make sense of the world, through the story.
Yeah. Hawa.
So gonachish. And that's how we say thank you in a Slinket way. But if you like say, oh, good as cheese, that's okay. I want to encourage everybody out there, again, learn how to introduce yourself. Learn who you are, where you come from. Tell your story. Share your story of who you are. And if you're going to learn one word in your language, and that word to start off with is just simply learn how to say thank you.
Mm.
Maybe that was the first word that Raven passed out to the people.
Wow. I love that.
So at this time, I'd like to just turn it over to Sarah Welser, who is with
The
ParentChild
CEO.
Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, CEO Plus. Gonash, cheers. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start by saying thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Rose, for connecting us to Jean. We're so delighted that you were all able to join us this evening. I'm Sarah Walzer from ParentChild Plus. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight for this compelling discussion, to Jean for a powerful, spellbinding example of the storytelling that we hope all children and families can experience. And thank you to all of you for joining us in this conversation about the importance of representation of First Nations people in children's books and stories. I recently read an article by Dr. Gregory Kaite about the importance of storytelling in Indigenous communities and was struck by this line: each adult was admonished to concern themselves with the development of each child into becoming a complete person for the good of the people. Your interest in this topic, in ParentChild Plus, and in our commitment to ensure that all children see themselves in the books they read and the stories they hear is a critical way to make a difference in the lives of each child in our communities, and ensure that each child has the opportunity to become a strong, confident, complete person. Here are a few other ways that you can make a difference. Check out the resources that we will send out and post on our website early next week. Buy books by these wonderful authors that you've heard from today and others whose books you'll find on our site. Listen to their podcasts. Listen to stories and share them with the children in your life and in your community, and have good conversations. Also on our website are the recordings and resources from our 4 previous Windows, Mirrors, and Doors conversations. We hope you will find them meaningful as well. Please share additional resources and ideas with us by emailing us at info@parentchildplus.org or via social media. You can also, of course, support ParentChild Plus's work to ensure all families have reading materials and access to stories that are diverse, inclusive, representative, and culturally relevant. Together, we all can support the development of the next generation and build a stronger, more equitable world. As Dr. Coyote says, story is the way that we remember to remember who we are and where we have come from and where we may go as we engage the potentials and challenges of the 21st century world. And I will add, especially now, as we all engage with the challenges of the ongoing pandemics and all the dislocation, sorrow, and stories they have wrought. Thank you so much for joining us this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And please stay tuned for an announcement about the next Windows, Mirrors, and Doors conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your day.